Next up, we have Jeffrey Smith, who founded the Institute for Responsible Technology, has been a one-man army warning about GMOs in general and GMO-related technologies that are being used now in efforts to completely change the food system, change the way we make drugs, and do other things. He has traveled around the world educating lawmakers, presidents, etc. Has written books and is going to give us two talks, one after the other. The first one is about GMOs, Roundup, and their health consequences to humans. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome especially to my fellow panelists who I know very well and have spoken on venues around the world. I'm going to do a deeper dive into disease, GMOs, and glyphosate, but I'm going to make it personal. The question is, are GMOs and Roundup causing your disease? We hear about so many things that can cause cancer or so many contaminations in food, in chocolate, in the air. But is it really worth it to take severe steps for some people and minor for others to eat organic and actually eliminate exposure? So we're going to go through, in the first of my talks, information that has convinced literally millions of people to change their diet. So we're going to make it personal, and I'm inviting you to check into your own decision making. Now, many of you will eat organic and say, yeah, I'm into organic, but then I go out to eat, or I eat at a friend's house, or I love these chips. This might change your mind to be loose in that. And I'm going to give my recommendation up front. Try going organic as much as possible, 100%, for a few weeks, and take notes. Create a spreadsheet, all of your symptoms, your mood, your energy level, and the percentage of organic that day. And you may discover that some of the things that you thought were simply part of your physiology, part of your weakness, is actually food related. So let's jump in. And I'm going to share with you information that I've gathered over my 28 years working on this. Now, I would speak at about 150 lectures and ask people, what did you notice you got better from when you switched to non-GMO and largely organic? And here's the 28 different conditions that they responded to. Now, these numbers came from a survey we sent out at the Institute for Responsible Technology. 3,256 people reported getting better from the same conditions that we heard from 150 lectures, including about a dozen or two medical conferences where the people that raised their hand and acknowledged improvement were talking about thousands of patients. Now, if you look at these, you may find one of your diseases on here, and these are people who got better from these conditions or disorders when they switched to non-GMO organic. A strong encouragement for you to try this experiment. So let's take a look at some of these diseases and take a deeper dive. What about digestion? Now, bowel dysfunction, GERD, food allergies, IBS, intestinal infection, peritonitis, underweight, they're all related. We see the people got better from 85% of the people in our survey said they got better from digestive disorders. Digestive disorders were the #1 reported improvement in all 150 lectures where I asked the audience. We also have food allergies, gluten sensitivity, and underweight. Now, it's not just a minor improvement. Of the 85% of the people who said they've improved in digestion, about 80% of those people had significant improvements, nearly gone or complete recovery from their digestive disorders. And that's also the case with pets. Pet owners and veterinarians responded to the survey on behalf of their pets, and similarly, the #1 improvement for pets was in digestion. Now, for people, irritable bowel, Crohn's, acid reflux, ulcers, gut pain, bloating, those were reported getting better when people switched. Livestock, the farmers and veterinarians talked about either the problem starting with GMOs or getting better when it was removed, diarrhea, gut bacteria imbalance, and intestinal damage. Animal feeding studies show clear links between GMOs, Roundup, and digestive problems. Gut bacteria we've heard about, severe stomach inflammation, stomach lesions, excessive growth of intestinal villi, reduced ability to digest. Here's a picture of the intestinal walls of rats that were fed GMO potatoes, not related to glyphosate, but related to the generic process of genetic engineering which caused this problem. Here's the stomach lining of rats that changed as a result of the generic process of GMOs. You've heard a lot about glyphosate this morning. GMOs themselves, whether they're sprayed with glyphosate or not, can damage the digestive tract. Here's the intestines of rats fed corn engineered to produce its own insecticide. The insecticide is the corn is a registered insecticide. It kills insects by poking holes in their guts. It was found in high concentrations in laboratories that it pokes holes in human cells, and it's the same type of holes that it kills the insects with. Here, rats that were fed BT corn had damage to their intestines. Here's a picture of inflamed stomachs on the right side of pigs that were fed GMOs and the normal stomachs of the pigs that were fed non-GMOs. There were ulcerations and severe inflammation. Now, glyphosate is one of the contributions to digestive disorders. It damages the little fingers inside the intestines that absorb nutrients, and it suppresses the ability of us to break down our food. Now, we mentioned that the Bt toxin creates holes in human cells that could create what's called leaky gut. Now, glyphosate also damages the microvilli. So we have corn that produces the Bt toxin that's also sprayed with Roundup because it's Roundup-ready corn that is also creates Bt toxins. Two different genes, at least two, that were inserted into the corn to allow them to produce an insecticide and withstand an herbicide. And so glyphosate is in big amounts on these corn that we eat as corn on the cob, if it happens to be genetically engineered, in the corn supply, in soy, etc. Now, glyphosate also disrupts the microbiome. We've heard that. There was a human study where they took a fake human gut and put in a microbiome of a 3-year-old and then fed it organic food and then added Roundup. And the changes were so significant. I talked to one of the microbiologists who was involved in the study, and I went through all of the 28 different problems that people got better from and said, would the changes in the gut bacteria alone explain the cause or worsening of any of these diseases? We went over each one, and every single one could be explained just by the gut bacteria. But glyphosate also promotes leaky gut. Leaky gut is linked to all diseases, according to a Harvard researcher. It also blocks mineral absorption, which is related to many, many diseases. It also damages the mitochondria, related to many diseases. It also inhibits the ability of the body to detoxify many other toxins. So it's like the king of toxins because it'll block the liver action from clearing out toxins that it would normally do, the cellular detoxification methods. And so we end up being fully toxified as long as glyphosate is in our system, and that is linked to many diseases. So you can see it basically damages the foundation of health in many ways that it can cause your disease or disorder. So here's some of the charts, and I have to thank Stephanie Seneff and others for providing these wonderful charts, which are devastating. And this shows the amount of glyphosate sprayed on soy and corn correlated to inflammatory bowel disease. Correlation does not prove causation. It is just one set of data in a bigger look. But we've already seen human reports, we've seen medical and clinical reports, we've seen animal feeding studies, and we even have plausible causative pathways, exactly how GMOs and Roundup can cause these diseases, damaging the microbiome. So in the context of all of those data points, we believe that this correlation is actually indicating that glyphosate and GMOs are causing these problems. I'm going to fly through these charts really quickly. You don't need to read all the words. I will read the name of the disease. You just look at that slope going up, which links either Roundup or the amount of GMO soy and corn to the particular disease. And look for your disease or the disease or disorders that your friends have, and realize that it may be driven by what is being eaten that you don't know about, the GMOs and the Roundup. Here's deaths from intestinal infection. Here's peritonitis. Here's irritable bowel disease, or inflammatory bowel disease. Here's functional bowel disorder. This is with GMO BT corn. Now, we know that from earlier speakers that it's not just avoiding GMOs. Glyphosate is sprayed on the beans and the grains and many other things. So you really need to eat organic and not just non-GMO. We talked about the celiac disease. It's interesting that in my book, Seeds of Deception, that came out 21 years ago, before every chapter, I describe another example of how animals, when given a choice, avoided eating GMOs. Sometimes they'd walk through the GMO field, knock down fences, or simply not eat the GMO unless it was the only thing that they had. And for many people, they'd come up to me in my 1,000 lectures in 43 countries and say, that convinced me more than anything. So I have to make sure, for those that want to follow the wisdom of the animals, to avoid eating GMOs. And someone found out about squirrels that had avoided eating the GMO corn that had been nailed to a tree, but they ate the non-GMO corn. So they bought a bag of GMO corn and non-GMO corn to do this experiment, but they forgot about it in their work shed, and the mice did the experiment for them. They broke into the non-GMO corn bag, ate it all. They broke into the GMO corn bag and didn't eat any of it. And they bit a kernel, but that was it. Now, what about low energy? Brain fog, fatigue, insomnia. If you're dealing with that, then I strongly encourage you to try going organic for some weeks and taking that journal, because 60% of the people who switched to non-GMO and organic reported having more energy, reduction of fatigue. Over 51% had reduced brain fog, and 33%, 1/3, had better sleep patterns, reduction of insomnia. Now, brain fog and fatigue can be explained by many aspects of glyphosate. It reduces minerals. Minerals are like the keys to the ignition to drive certain metabolic pathways. Without those minerals, a lot of things simply don't function. But it also damages the mitochondria. And when it actually destroys the mitochondria, you can see that under a microscope. The mitochondria are the energy centers of the cells. And in my film Secret Ingredients that I did with Amy Hart, there was Dr. David Perlmutter says the brain is 5% of the body weight, but it uses 25% of the energy. And when the mitochondria is damaged, it can explain things like brain fog and other cognitive disorders. So many people tell me that when they switch to organic, it's like a light goes on, sometimes within 2 days. Now, the sleep thing is very interesting. It's basically a straight line. The gut bacteria in our bodies use the shikimate pathway. You heard that term from Dr. Don Huber. It uses the shikimate pathway to produce L-tryptophan, an amino acid. It doesn't matter about these terms. It produces something. That something, L-tryptophan, produces serotonin. Most people have heard of serotonin, a happy chemical. The serotonin is converted to melatonin, which some of you take to fall asleep, and the melatonin governs circadian rhythms. Now, glyphosate in our diet can block the shikimate pathway, block the L-tryptophan, block the serotonin, block the melatonin, and keep us awake. Remember, 1/3 of the people out of the 3,256 that we surveyed said that they reduced their insomnia when they switched to a non-GMO and largely organic food. So if you're having trouble sleeping, please give this a try. Insomnia also was rising in parallel with the amount of glyphosate in the United States since it was introduced to be sprayed on GMOs. Big time. Hospital discharge diagnosis of sleep disorders. Thank you, Stephanie Seneff, for these charts. If you want to get more personal with some of these, look at the film Secret Ingredients at secretingredientsfilm.com, a film that I did with Amy Hart, which looks at a dozen individuals and families that switch to organic, and we can see how these things improved in them. And the doctors say these are not one-offs. These happen every day in my practice. And the scientists explain why, and we show animations of what happens in the body. It's the most effective, compelling tool to get people to eat organic. So if you're already 100% organic, you probably have cousins and friends and whatnot that as soon as you start talking about food, their eyes glaze over and they move away. People tell me that when they showed their spouses or their kids or their parents or their best friends Secret Ingredients, then their friends, those others who watched it, can become more adamant than they in eating organic. So please use this resource. It was designed for this purpose. Now, what about cancer? We've had enough information. My friend Michael Baum talked about cancer, but I think we want to just show that in the animal feeding studies, here's one where animals that were fed GMOs on the left, GMOs sprayed with Roundup in the middle, or Roundup alone on the right, all developed these massive tumors. And when they hit 25% of the body weight, they euthanized the rats. Huge, huge tumors. And many studies have shown things like this. So we have the World Health Organization, we have animal feeding studies, and we have this correlational evidence. Not all cancers so far have been linked in this correlation, but we have kidney and pelvic cancer, we have liver cancer, liver and bile duct cancer, thyroid cancer, deaths from leukemia, breast cancer, etc. So now, what about metabolic diseases? Very popular diseases. Diabetes, obesity, hormonal problems, thyroid, lipoprotein metabolism. So people who switched to non-GMO and organic told me that they lost weight, sometimes without even trying. 55% of the people from our study. Hormonal problems, 30%. Diabetes, over 10%. Animal feeding studies confirm that some of these things affect the animals when they're force-fed GMOs or Roundup. Diabetes, dramatic rise in parallel with GMOs and glyphosate. Obesity deaths, same thing. Deaths due to lipoprotein metabolism disorders. What about kidney and liver failure? Well, kidney disease was reported as being improved in some people. My friend, Dr. Michelle Perro, she treats kids. She's a pediatrician. She told me the story of a family that had an autistic boy. She put the whole family on an organic diet, and the father's kidney disease dramatically improved. She wasn't treating the father. He just switched to organic. The sister's ADHD improved. The mother lost weight. So it's a holistic effect when you switch to a non-GMO and organic, which is why I'm encouraging everyone to take notes in a spreadsheet when they switch, because you may not be paying attention to your acne or your sex drive or your energy level, but they may change. We have people reporting improvements in kidney disease and whatnot. I talked to one doctor, one veterinarian. He said that when GMOs were introduced to the livestock feed, he analyzed livers of animals that said they looked like a bomb went off. Here's an example of rats on the right side. You could see the difference in the livers when the rats were fed GMO soy compared to non-GMO soy. And glyphosate causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at tiny doses at parts per trillion. And now 25 to 30% of the US population has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which can get much worse. And the people that have it tend to have glyphosate in their urine. The people that have the more damaging version have even more glyphosate. Here's some correlations with acute kidney injury, kidney failure death, hepatitis C. And what about neurological disorders? Autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, schizophrenia, brain fog, mood, and anxiety. Let's just go through some of the charts here. We have people reporting getting better from these things. We have deaths from Alzheimer's. We have deaths from Parkinson's, dementia, deaths from senile dementia, ADHD, anxiety, schizophrenia, suicide by overdose, autism in 6-year-olds, almost a perfect correlation. Thank you for this, Stephanie. And a lot of these are reported in the film Secret Ingredients. Now, what about birth defects? We're going to fly through these because there's just too many charts, and menstrual problems, infertility, low sperm count, etc. So we have people reporting getting better from some of these things. Livestock have been devastated. Dr. Don Huber, one of my great teachers, have talked to me about this, and also in my film Genetic Roulette. Animal feeding studies have all sorts of infertility issues, and we know that glyphosate promotes birth defects. Here's a slide that was given to me when I was speaking at the European Parliament. It was given to me by Dr. Irina Ermakova, a senior researcher at the Russian Academy of Sciences, so they're Russian-speaking rats. And she fed them genetically engineered soy, starting 2 weeks before they got pregnant, through the pregnancy and lactation, and more than half of their babies died within 2 weeks, compared to 10%. They were also smaller on average, and most could not reproduce. Other scientists in Russia did studies on hamsters for 3 generations. Most could not have babies. They also were smaller, and some had birth defects of hair growing in their mouths. We have changes in the testicles, and the uterus, and ovaries. You can see the changes in the testicles of rats that were fed GM soy compared to non-GM soy. And one study that I interviewed Dr. Skinner, the Skinner Institute, when they injected Roundup into rats, the great-grandchildren suffered the most. He found that there was epigenetic effects, and 90% of the great-grandchildren had serious problems, including problems during pregnancy. Congenital birth defects, congenital heart defects, newborn metabolic disorders, newborn genitourinary disorders, skin disorders, lung conditions, newborn eye disorders, blood disorders, lymph disorders, etc. We're not even going to go into hypertension and joint pain and these other skin conditions. We don't have time. So we have stroke, we have anemia, we have etc. So what we need to do is get involved. I'd like to invite you to the Institute for Responsible Technology. Join one of our communities. We've put the best of our 21 years together for you for the self-care advocacy program and the healthcare community program. It's $25 a month. We are almost out of money right now, so we need that money to support us so we can continue doing what we've been doing. Now, what we've been doing has been incredibly effective. We've been championing the health dangers of GMOs since we started in 21 years ago, and 51% of Americans say they believe GMOs are unhealthy. 48% of the people worldwide. So we could be doing a victory lap at this point because the way that we have conveyed the health dangers, and the film that I described is one way, the talks, the books, etc., have changed the global debate. But there is something that's now a bigger issue. And that is gene editing, GMO 2.0 in general, and gene editing, which is one of the new types of technologies that can do genetic engineering so inexpensively, so easily, that it's being taught in school. So high schoolers are doing gene editing and creating GMOs in the classroom. And we expect that if we don't stop it, it'll be used throughout the high school systems and by home hobbyists. You can buy very inexpensive, simple labs. You can buy an entire lab for less than $2,000 and create your own GMOs at home. And there's no real regulation of those. So once you create a GMO, you can't recall it from the environment. It can self-propagate. Now, they're also prone to unpredictable side effects, which is a terrible combination since they persist in the environment. The journal Nature looked at the results of 3 studies using gene editing, CRISPR in this case, on human embryos and called the results chromosomal mayhem. There were deletions, additions, shattering, all sorts of mutations. There's a study that shows that when they did gene editing for a cow to try and create hornless cattle, they ended up stuffing in genes from bacteria accidentally into the cow. When they gene edited mice, they had not only bacteria DNA, but goat DNA and cow DNA in this new soup of the mice DNA. In our website, responsibletechnology.org, I encourage you to look at the 6-minute animated journey into the DNA called 7 Reasons Why Gene Editing is Dangerous and Unpredictable. It is based on peer-reviewed published research, and it shows without a doubt that gene editing is quite dangerous and that they should never have approved it and allowed it for use in food or anything that could be released into the environment. But the industry convinced the governments that GMOs created by gene editing was safe, precise, and predictable. They're lies. But on that basis, the government has looked the other way, and countries around the world are saying, whatever you do with gene editing, as long as you don't introduce a foreign gene into it, we don't need to pay any attention. So the CRISPR mushrooms that were ignored by the USDA might be producing toxins or allergens because research showed that the technique that was used to create the mushrooms is faulty and could create deadly truncated proteins. And now there's companies like Conscious Foods. They don't require any studies whatsoever, and they're just putting gene-edited food into the food supply. And it doesn't have to be labeled because it's gene-edited. That's another loophole. So we're now looking at the possibility of new types of foods introduced, stealth GMOs, throughout our food supply. And it's from lab to table, and you can do it in high school. You can do it as a young entrepreneur. You can do it as a major company, and no one has to know. But the replacement of food by dangerous gene-edited GMOs is not the existential threat that I wanted to talk about. Because we could be replacing nature. There is a gene rush going on where people want to rush their patented genetically engineered organisms to solve a problem, make money, but they got to get their product out there before the patent expires, often before any scientific safety studies are done. Everything with DNA is up for grabs. Now, when you release it with this low-cost, easily accessible gene editing product that's widely deregulated, that can persist in the environment, and that's prone to side effects, you're talking about a recipe for disaster where this generation can replace nature. So future generations will not inherit the products of the billions of years of evolution, but instead lab-created GMOs prone to side effects that cannot be recalled. So it is the mandate of this generation, given this new technology, to protect all living beings and all future generations, now that we have a technology to damage all living beings and all future generations. So having run the Institute for Responsible Technology for 21 years, we were massively successful at creating a new debate on the health dangers. So how do we deal with gene editing being deregulated in the United States and Canada, the UK? They're trying to get the EU. It's been deregulated in India, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, Japan. Every single local anti-GMO group has not been able to stop this juggernaut. We decided to go after the species that are the most dangerous to genetically engineer. Think about what it could be. Yeah, some people say humans, but in this case, it's not. It's microorganisms. It's the microbiome. You see, we co-evolved with the microbes as humans, and we can get by with a measly 22,000 genes because we use the genetic information of the 3.5 million genes of the microbes living inside us. We've outsourced about 90% of our daily metabolic and chemical functions to the microbes, and the shape of our microbiome dictates our health. It is so important that the entire pregnancy process is partly designed to protect and create a healthy microbiome in the infant. In the second trimester, milk-digesting bacteria come into the birth canal. The first milk out of the breast feeds the microbiome and also clears out the oxygen to make better environment for the bifidobacteria, which is healthy. If the child, now listen to this, if the child's sick, the microbes in their saliva feed back through the nipple and can change the breast milk to support the health of the child. And when the child improves, the breast milk can revert. This micro Jedi army works on our behalf at all times, and we're just now experiencing and appreciating it, and appreciating the 1 trillion microbes on the planet. And you can watch a film, 16-minute film, on responsibletechnology.org called Don't Let the Gene Out of the Bottle, which talks about just how potentially devastating it is if we start releasing these GMO microbes. For example, it talks about a genetically engineered microbe, which, had it been released as planned, could have theoretically ended terrestrial plant life on the planet. Why? Because microbes travel. We didn't need a pandemic to know that microbes can travel around the world. But they also can mutate. We all know that from the pandemic. But they also swap genes. So if you release a genetically engineered microbe from a high school biology class, from your own basement, it potentially can take that gene that you have created and end up inoculating other microbes and spreading around the world, wreaking havoc, damaging or collapsing ecosystems. Now, how important are microbes? We talked about they can dictate human health. Microbes in the soil draw down carbon. Fungal networks transport nutrients between trees. The oxygen on the planet is largely created by algae. So we're talking about existential mechanisms at risk. And those are just 4 that I mentioned. But remember, 1 trillion microbes do things we have not yet even discovered, and yet we're permanently altering them by the release of genetically engineered microbes. In agriculture, 2 companies so far are bragging that they have put trillions of microbes per acre on up to 43 million acres, and that's what we know about. Synthetic biology is being used by hundreds of labs, putting in things like opioids and things into microbes, turning them into little genetically engineered factories. If those get out, they can change the nature of nature. Probiotics and medicines are being designed in a lab, so living organisms that have never existed before are being designed for consumption, and academia has the greatest resource of a variety of genetically engineered microbes, and soon it'll just be high schools itself. The amount of microbes being produced by high schools can dwarf all of this. We must lock them down. We need new regulations, laws, and treaties. So the Institute is now shifted from trying to convince people to stop eating GMOs and eat organic. We're developing the science to create policy recommendations. We want to build a global coalition and spread the message through popular culture. What's interesting is that the pandemic actually works on our behalf because now everyone is aware of the dangers of microbes, and they're all freaked out about gain of function because you're taking a look at potentially pandemic pathogens, and that takes care of less than 1% of the microbes. It's a great idea, but it actually ignores biology because the common microbes inside us, in the soil, in the air, those can do as much damage as a potentially pandemic pathogen. As much damage if you change the nature of nature and how it's functioning inside us or around us. So we have natural allies, including the gain of function. Folks, human health, regenerative agriculture, environmental conservation, ocean conservation, invasive species control, even national security is freaked out about giving the keys to the codes of life to anyone with a CRISPR kit. So we've already reached out to leaders in the functional medicine and healthcare community. We have a website, we have a whole program for them. We have actually run out of money, and we're looking for support of individuals to join our team, the most influential, creative, and brilliant, caring people, to protect against this, which I think is the greatest existential threat we face. So please make an investment in the Institute for Responsible Technology so we can help organize, coordinate, and extend this information so that all the different groups that depend on a healthy microbiome and depend on a healthy natural nature can learn this information and learn the steps to protect it. So what we've done is we've shared two things. What you can do first for your own health, and I recommend putting your health budget into your food budget, put your philanthropy budget into your food budget, make sure you're eating organic, take notes, see what happens, share the results with others. But second, we can't rely on choices in a supermarket to create a tipping point against gene-edited microorganisms, trees, insects, etc. Humanity has come to a point where we are now facing the existential crisis because we've been given a technology that is unprecedented. We know we would never give an atomic bomb detonator to an adolescent and say, don't press the red button. But we're willing to give a CRISPR kit to anyone and say, oh, don't release anything that might take us down. We have no idea at this point what that can do. I believe in a collective consciousness. I believe when a small number of people get this and shift their own awareness to support a new way of thinking, to protect nature instead of risk damaging it, that we can turn this around. We all have heard of people who have gotten a prognosis of a serious disease, maybe a terminal disease, that turned out to be a blessing in their lives. I hope and believe that this information will result in an up-leveling of human relationship with nature. So it actually becomes a blessing, not only in terms of protecting all living beings and all future generations, but that it gives us a deeper understanding of how now we must be stewards of life, the codes of life, and future generations in ways that we have not been able to do before or not willing to do before. So I am very positive. I've seen how we have contained GMOs for so long, and I believe that this information, which for some may be very scary, actually has a golden side, a golden thread of how it can change and awaken human consciousness to work better with nature and protect it for all living beings and all future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Unfortunately, CRISPR is not the only new technology that is being used on foods and other products, because, as you said, the ability to patent life forms, which didn't exist until a few years ago, is too enticing for people who want to make a killing and have a big impact. The fact that they can play with life is very desirable for them. And as you pointed out, there's been virtually no regulation in this field. We will talk about some other problems with food in addition to the CRISPR problems in a little bit with Elsa Van Hamlin and Rob Verkerk.